All right, so you guys are getting like a behind the scenes look of how one of our podcast episodes are made. So you're gonna pretend you're in the live studio audience, okay? I'm also very hot, so if y'all see me doing this, bear with me, okay? All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the very first live episode taping of Exit Wound. For those of you who don't know, Exit Wound is a podcast series hosted by myself, Melanie Thompson, where I have conversations with fellow survivors of sex trafficking and prostitution, focusing on the challenges of rebuilding their lives after sexual exploitation. But tonight, we're gonna do something a little different. We're going to focus outward rather than inward. We're looking at culture, a very specific aspect of our culture, sex buying. What does the so-called average person think about sex buying? But before we even jump into the ins and outs of prostitution, why don't we back up a little bit? I want to take a temperature check of where we are at as a culture. So just this past March 8th, ironically, International Women's Day, a poll came out stating that Gen Z men and women are more divided than any other generation on key questions about feminism, gender roles, and women's rights. So I'm sure some of you in the room might have heard about misogynistic influencers like Jordan Peterson or Nick Fuentes, or even accused traffickers and rapists like the Tate brothers, Matt Gaetz, Pete Hegseth, and so on and so forth. And they might actually have a lot more reach than ever, whether they're preaching on their YouTube channels or actually influencing policy. So what does all this have to do with buying sex? Well, that's what we're gonna get into tonight. So first I want to introduce my fellow panelists, and then we'll have a little treat for you all. So I'm here joined by the incredible Ted Bunch, who is the Chief Development Officer of A Call to Men and an internationally renowned advocate. I want to introduce my dear friend Ben Gauen, who is a trial lawyer at, tell me your law firm's name again?
Schrader, Goldmark, and Bender.
What he said, but also worked formerly at the I can't say, where you worked before here?
I am from Seattle, Washington. I flew in from Seattle this morning. It's great to be here. I used to be a district attorney with the King County Prosecutor's Office in Seattle, not the Kings County here.
You know New York, because we only care about New York, so we don't know anything outside of New York. And for those of you who know, I want to welcome back my dear friend and fellow survivor leader, Katrina Massey, who is on the board of Protect All Children Against Trafficking, as well as PACT Survivors Council. So thank you all for joining me here today. And yes, give them a round of applause. So really quickly, Chris, be on standby. Just a little background. We decided that we wanted to do something a little bit different than what we usually do. We're used to being in conversation, having panels like this, attending CSW, but we never actually went on the street and had a conversation with folks. So myself, Nora, and a few others from our team decided to split up, take to the streets rather, and interview predominantly men, but just some of our neighbors here in New York City to see what their thoughts are on sex buying. So I want to show you the first clip of this video. Be mindful that these are very low budget street interviews. So the volumes are going to vary. Some people you're gonna hear shouting at you, some people you might not hear at all. There are some captions on the screen. We did our best, okay? And let's take a look.
Yes.
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 Yeah.
Of course.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, vaguely.
Vaguely.
No.
But you know of it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Kind of
A little bit.
I've been there, yeah.
I've heard about it, but I've never been there, so.
But you've heard of a red light district in
Because I
general?
lived in the red light district.
Oh,
at one time, years
really?
ago.
In Amsterdam?
No, here.
Ah,
I've heard of it, yes. Yes.
Do you know anyone who's visited?
Not personally.
Yes.
you visited.
What did you think?
It was fascinating. It's an accepted practice there. It's entirely different from anything that I had experienced living here in the United States. I remember it was very late at night, and when somebody would go into a place, everybody would cheer, and the woman would close the curtains, and you would continue along your way.
Yeah.
I also remember that everybody was pretty high.
Well, I was there many years ago,
I never frequented, but I've walked through and I've been there.
No.
But you've heard of it.
Yes.
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 Have you, any of you ever been there?
Yes.
Loaded question.
I know.
I don't know. I'm not the demographic that would, but I feel like some people, if you're lonely enough, it's an easy way out. It's an easy way to get it.
Well, I've always actually been very impressed by the Dutch people's view of sex.
Funny thing, I was there with my wife, so
Yeah.
she was encouraging me to even look.
Yeah.
I was trying not to stare
Not to look.
with my wife, right beside me, but she was more looking at those women
In the
like
windows.
with beautiful shapes.
I don't buy it myself, so I don't know. That's a good question. Lonely, power. What else? I would think it's either you're lonely or you think it's a power move. I don't know. That's one I can think of.
That's it.
About the same.
About the same thing.
Yeah. Either out of some desire for intimacy or some desire for dominance.
Yeah.
People try to buy something that they maybe cannot get by themselves. Some people, maybe they don't have a girlfriend or something and then try to buy it that way.
It's quite easy, when you... No, I'm not going to speak for myself because I never went there for myself. But I imagine that it's a bit easy when you want to have sex and you just have to open your wallet and go there. So.
Because they can't get it any other way.
It's one of the oldest professions, isn't it? Like considered some people.
Yeah, it's human nature. They want it, so easy access to them, I guess.
I think, there's a lot of people who are lonely out in this world. And for them, it's even harder maybe to find someone to have a connection with. And it's the easiest way if you have money.
Maybe they feel lonely. They want to experience it. Maybe they don't get out and don't know how to do it.
Sometimes people are lonely.
Yeah.
It's a quick, easy way to just get it quicker without having to go through any effort of engaging or talking with people to, form a bond or relationship. So I think that's one of the main factors.
Yeah, I mean, it's because of lust, because we have lost the control of our passions. I mean, it's just an easy way to get what the body asks for.
I'm not gonna lie, sex runs the world. It runs the world, and it's human nature. You know what I'm saying? So it's the number one thing.
Companionship, loneliness, easier than maintaining real relationships with people.
People who are unable to come by it through other means, so people who feel obliged to pay for it.
Because they're degenerates. I don't know, I don't think it's that normal to buy sex from another person.
Yeah.
Because if it's possible, people
They'll do it.
consume it.
Yeah.
Or why do you think people do it?
Because it's less complicated.
All right. So obviously I have some thoughts, but we're going to hold off on those. I want to turn to you guys for a second. So just all of you, whoever wants to start first, what were your initial reactions to what you saw, or if you couldn't see here? What did you think about any of this? Does any of this surprise you? And anyone can start.
It's definitely not surprising. I was really surprised that there weren't more controversial answers or answers that really stood up for those that are harmed in the sex trade. Not a single one, really just, they always talked about themselves, which is way too common in our society. And, it had absolutely nothing to do with the person on the other side, which dives deeper into this ideal of objectifying that specific act.
You make me think about that it would have been a next question to ask around what do people think about purchasing of bodies or selling of bodies, or it would have been interesting. You know, I'm old enough to remember when 42nd Street was our red light district. I mean, it was clear, and I've been to India, to Sonagachi, which is a red light district in India also, and there, one thing that was really sad but very clear was that these very young girls, and I remember my daughter was about the age of one of these girls who, as we walked through, because we were with Apniap, Ruchira Gupta's organization. We were with them and working with men in that community around addressing trafficking. But what was clear was that everything, the entire community, and it was a community, the entire community, the entire industry, which was mentioned earlier, the industry, the stores in the community, everything relied on the selling of these bodies. Like, everyone was invested in that, you know, and it would have been interesting to also hear about that, about how people felt about that. But it wasn't surprising, Melanie, to answer your question about the answers that those folks gave. I think that, unfortunately, we don't think about, especially men, don't think about the impact of what's happening with women and girls in particular.
And I think that's part of the conversation we have, right? Because most people who don't do this work day in and day out think about Katrina, myself, other survivors, right? They just think, oh, they want to do it. It's their choice, right? So, of course, it's very easy for someone to be like, I think people do it because they're lonely, but this is why we're having this conversation. Ben, did anything stick out for you with this?
I think a few themes did. One was just a general apathy.
Yeah.
Secondly, deflection. You know, and the gentleman that said it's not my demographic, I wanted to tell him, like, it's exactly you. It's people that look like you and I. And I say that not shame-based.
Yeah.
I say that because I'm not trying to cancel the dude out. If you were here, I would say, hey, we're part of the problem. We can also be part of the solution, right? And then I think the third thing is just with the red light district, the concept of that's not happening here, right? That's some place else across a different continent. And there's almost kind of a romanticization of it, like a good old pastime, without recognizing the human element, who's actually there and why.
That's actually a good point. I do want to say, I should have prefaced by saying this. In terms of shame or canceling, so in the video, we made sure that we got consent from everybody that we were interviewing. So if you see in the video that the camera is looking down at our feet, those are the folks who did not want to be recorded, obviously, with their face. And then you have others that did. So I just wanted to point that out. I'm going to come back to you, Ben, because I have a question for you. But Ted, what's interesting about you is that you work specifically with young men. And I'm curious to know, in the work that you do with young men, does this topic of prostitution ever come up? And if so, what are some of the attitudes that you hear from young boys about either sex buying or prostitution in general?
So, yes, at A Call to Men, which is a national organization focused on ending all forms of violence against women and girls and also promoting healthy and respectful manhood and masculinity. And we do work with men, but we also work with young men and boys. We have a Live Respect curriculum, life skills and well-being for boys and young men, which addresses all of these things, including positive mental health for boys, but also authenticity, gender equality, gender equity, and also all things related to violence and discrimination, anti-bullying, gun violence prevention. That's what the Live Respect curriculum does. And we wrote that with Scholastic, and it's doing well around the country and in a couple other countries as well. But what the conversation we have with our young folks in particular is the same conversation we have with our men, because all that those young boys are doing is repeating and showing what the generation above them has passed down to them. Because it's our collective socialization that is the issue. So it's not even about someone purchasing the body, it's about all of us. When we look at violence against women, while most violence against women is done by men, most men aren't violent, but we're silent about those that are, and that's as much of the problem as the violence and abuse is, or the purchasing of bodies is as well. So when we talk to our boys, we're really talking to them about that we've passed down these belief systems to you. And there's lots of wonderful things about being a boy and being a man. And I just want to preface this by anything that I say for the rest of the night is not about indicting men. It's actually about inviting men. And it's not about calling men out, but calling men in. And we all need to be called in. None of us are living this perfect life. And we've all been socialized to see women and girls in a certain way. And this is what we pass down to our boys. We call it the man box. And some of those ways that we teach our boys the views around manhood and masculinity is what men reinforce, which is that women and girls have less value than men and boys, right? Anywhere we can go out there in Central Park, there's a 6-year-old boy throwing a baseball with his dad, his uncle, his coach, and if that man wants him to throw that ball harder, he'll say, you gotta throw harder than that, son. You throw like a... Wow, so that's our socialization. How do you know the answer? We haven't talked about it, but that's our socialization. It's in the air that we breathe. By the way, girls throw just fine. The other issue is around property. Wherever I'm from, if I'm right now in 2025, see a man hitting his wife or girlfriend in your community right now, whatever that community is, and I walk over to him and say, knock it off, what's he gonna say to me? How do you all know the answer to that? These are the messages that men have between each other and we pass down to each other. And then the sexual objectification, and so pornography is really where the conversation is much more, Melanie, that we're having around the sexual objectification and devaluing of women and girls. Because pornography, and there's a research project out a couple years back by Harvard that stated that about 80% of all 5th graders have already seen pornography. And I shared this yesterday in the same panel we had that, when I was 10 years old, the Playboy magazine looked like Victoria's Secret's ads on Fifth Avenue. They're in Pornhub, hearing all kinds of language, misogynistic behavior, abusive behavior, and they think that's what masculinity is. They think that's what a sexual expression is, and this is at 10 years old. And I know some of you all are saying, well, I put parental controls on my kids, and then he's in class with his buddy who's saying, did you see this? So we don't get away from it. So all of those things are really the messages of socialization that we pass down from one generation to the next, and we're just on remote control. So this is the interruption of it. So when we start peeling back those layers for our boys around the socialization that we've taught them, and again, we're all swimming in the same water, so we're really taking ownership over whatever their beliefs are because they've learned it from us. So that's really what we have conversations with them about, Melanie.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Ted. And Ben, in this video, in the interviews that we did, right, we have no way to know or tell who actually purchases sex and who doesn't. But you, working at the King County Prosecutor's Office, right, you actually prosecuted people who did purchase sex. So could you tell me, did you see any similarities in the mindset between the men who were answering the questions in the video and the men that you've actually prosecuted? And can you talk a little bit maybe about the buyer pathology that you've seen in your work?
Sure. It's difficult for me to watch a clip like that and make judgments. But let me say this. Yeah. I mean, first of all, vast majority of men do not buy sex. Like, let's clap that up for a second, right? The studies out there are anywhere from 6 to 10% of men at some point in their life have bought sex. So you walk into a room like this, I think we can safely, rest assured most men don't do this. They understand the harm of it, which is a good thing. I have prosecuted hundreds of sex buyers, and I need therapy after it, to be honest with you. Part of the work involves having these guys go through psychosexual deviancy evaluations, which are really robust assessments that look at their past history, their risk of reoffending, whether they have any underlying deviancy issues. A lot of these guys were caught trying to buy sex from a minor. They didn't go online necessarily trying to find a minor, right? But we had decoy officers. They're responding to an ad that says 20, 21 years of age because those are the ads that can stay up without getting taken down, and the officer says, I'm actually 16 or 17. And what we found is most of these guys are opportunists. They're not actually predators. They want sex on, like a pizza. They want to order it then and there, and they want to have power and control over it. The good news is, with the evaluations we've looked at, most of these guys do not have some sort of underlying sexual deviancy issue. Okay, they're not pedophiles, they're not sociopaths. They have a very low risk of reoffending. The things that they do have in common that I can speak about are one, just fundamentally being broken about something, a need that needs to be fulfilled. And that is a need of connection, a need of self-worth, a need of confidence, a need of having control over something. There's some need that's not being fulfilled. And talk about socialization, the idea that you're going to get human connection and avoid loneliness by engaging in a commercial sex transaction that's going to last 15 minutes. And what my survivor friends tell me is this is why they're called tricks, right? That facade, that illusion, to think that that need is going to be fulfilled is so antithetical. But that's what they're trying to find. And the socialization piece is critical because they are conditioned to think that that's going to bring them happiness, that that's going to fulfill the need. Second thing that I see is some level of misogyny, and that's a spectrum. I think at the low end of that is dehumanization, right? This is not a person. This is not a woman. This is a commodity. This is a good. I'm going to rate this person like I would rate a Yelp review. And then the far end, and we see this too, is just like a overt hatred of women. Fortunately, that is not, I think, as prolific, but that certainly is out there. And I'm sure we'll get to this, but with a low risk of reoffense, engaging these guys in a community where they can be vulnerable, they can be accountable, really does change their hearts and minds, which is a really cool thing, and I hope we can talk about that at some point.
Thank you for that. I mean, obviously, as a survivor, I have biases, and I have thoughts about why buyers buy or why they do what they do, but I'm gonna keep an open mind. Which brings me to you, Katrina, as my fellow survivor on here. I want to talk really briefly about this new trending epidemic of male loneliness. So I have the fact here, right? Yeah. So people say that men are more isolated than ever, and there was a recent study that came out that found that 51% of men lack a single confidant for emotional support. So we just saw in the video, right, and the men were talking when we were asking them, like, why do you think somebody would pay for sex in general? And we saw that the top answers were loneliness, that it's easy, that it's avoiding emotional labor. We even had one of the women say that it's easier to, instead of building a real relationship. So as a survivor, I want to know from your perspective, do you agree that these are the reasons that predominantly men are the ones purchasing sex? Do you think that's why they're purchasing, or do you think it's something else?
That's the convenient answer.
I like that.
Because, we all yearn for deeper, more fulfilling relationships. We all do. So to say that fulfills that is just an absolute cop-out deflection, as mentioned before, and not really digging into what the real issues are. Again, they treat it as if it's like an object. Again, there's no consideration for who's on the other side. And what's dangerous about that is there's no consideration for how it affects society as a whole. Everyone, and not just in this arena, but in many arenas of life, everyone's thinking about themselves. Neighbors don't even know each other anymore. There's not a level of connection amongst community as there was before. And it's like, what can I do to fulfill what I need and what I want right now? Join a social club. Get on Meetup. Get a pet, it's so convenient to ignore what the real issues are. But that also digs into, why people choose to, how they become addicts. What are you not dealing with? What are you not facing? And
Listen, I'm more inclined to say, and this is just me talking from trauma, I guess, but I feel like, people like to say, like, hurt people, or, like, maybe he's dealing with something. But I'm like, but I be dealing with something every day.
Exactly.
And I'm not buying nobody. But not to make this like a battle of the sexes, right? But, I personally think that people buy sex because they have a love of power and control, right? And dominance.
Absolutely.
Fellas, I want to know, do you guys agree with what Katrina's saying, what I'm saying? Do you think that it's just, an innate craving for sex? Do you think it's loneliness? Do you think it's power? Do you think it's something else that we don't know about?
I think
The laughter is hilarious.
I think that all of this, many things can be true at the same time.
Absolutely.
Right? So, and men do have outlets, social outlets and that kind of thing, but so what comes up for me in this conversation is that, yes, men are taught, and we pass this down again to our boys, to be misogynistic, to not value women and girls, to see women and girls as sexual object, right? To see women on some level as the property of men. So we're disconnected from the humanity of women. We're not connected to the humanity of women. And actually, in my opinion, women are much more evolved with humanity than men are, because that man box that I mentioned before, that male socialization, does not allow us to go there. Because when we go there, and whether it's vulnerability, whether it's sensitivity, whether it's sharing our emotions, whether it's tapping into all of those emotional spaces and those human and humanity spaces, that has been always gendered, and so if you're doing that, you're somehow not a man in this male socialization. So, as a result, our little boys are not taught to share their feelings. So when they're lonely, to not express that, all the isolation that occurs. When you look at the kids who are picking up guns, who are shooting people, these are isolated. There's isolation. It's real. And so how it gets played out is it shows up differently. So I think that all of those things are real, that men are lonely, that there are men who go because I don't want to be rejected by a woman, and this guarantees that I won't be rejected. Actually, she's going to be happy to see me, even though, of course, she's not. She's acting. You're purchasing that appearance, that expression, right? But that's what, and it's also about the conquest, that we're taught that it's about the conquest of sex and women, and if men aren't able to do that without purchasing, then maybe they purchase to fulfill that too. So it really taps into all of those kind of voids and empty spaces for men in so many different ways. And at the same time, misogyny, power and control, all of those things are very much a part of it, but that's also a part of this patriarchal masculinity, and there's, I don't want to,
Say it.
Well, I just want to be careful because yes, we want to dismantle the patriarchy, right? But at the same time, there's men who are in patriarchal, who are the patriarch of their family, who are very loving, respectful, and do all the wonderful things that men are capable of doing, right? So I just want to be sensitive to that, though I do want to dismantle. Well, toxic masculinity, so we wouldn't put those two words together, because it's not helpful, because men don't connect to that. That's the word that we know, and it's kind of sexy, everybody knows what it means, but it doesn't engage men. And if we want violence against women to stop, we have to engage men, because if women could have stopped it, they would have already. So we have to get involved as men with the leadership of women, very important, with the leadership of women. So toxic masculinity, it just we don't put those two words together because it's not really helpful. It doesn't do anything to help to engage men. So anyway.
And you know what? We're actually going to get into that. We are going to talk about that. I know time is moving, so I'm going to keep moving along. But we, personally, we have historically, culturally, societally have seen prostitution and sex trafficking as a woman's issue and a woman's fight, when we know that the majority of the perpetrators are males, are men, absolutely, right? So I do think that there's a benefit. I mean, of course, I'm going to kick and scream and curse y'all out when I'm in the mirror, because y'all did a lot of damage to me, right? Y'all as a whole. However, I like what you said at the beginning of this, of we're not in the business of indicting, but more inviting. We need to have men in the conversation. I mean, even trying to put this panel together was difficult for us, right? Trying to find men who would engage in the conversation, not only in a public forum, but during Women's Month and during CSW. So, you know, I do want to say I thank you both for your vulnerability for this and joining in this conversation.
Melanie, let me clarify. While holding men accountable, we want to call them in, and we want to not indict.
Of course.
So we
Always going to do that.
Yeah,
We ain't gonna stray away
but I want to make sure you understand that I want to do that too. That it really is around accountability is really important. But you know, to your point, you know, we have to be able to meet them where they're at if we want to bring them along, and we have to bring them along if we want it to stop.
Ben, did you want to add to that?
Do we have parents here? Do we have some parents?
Parents?
Okay, cool.
Woo! Come on.
I want to know if this was going to hit. You know, I have a 10-year-old son, and my wife's a badass. She's a feminist. She works. She's not somebody that would accept this kind of language. And he comes home the other day, my 10-year-old son, and he goes, Teo, his buddy at school, he goes, bro, he calls everyone bro, Teo slays girls. And I'm like, what? First of all, what does that mean? You know, so I was like, we're going to unpack this for a sec. What do you mean slays? And he goes, he gets girls. And he's 10 years old, right? I mean, I don't know what this means. And so I was like, okay, well, his name's Henry. I was like, Henry, what does that mean? Like, is Teo nice? Yes. Is he kind to the girls? Yes. Is he respectful? Yes. Is he funny? Yes. Does he include them in activities? Yes. So that's what it means to have somebody like you, right? It's not getting the object. It's acting in a way that values the friendship, the humanity, the existence, ways that are kind, accepting, and that's the quality that you want to hold on to. It's not getting the girl. But I'm telling you, these are the same principles that I mean, I played sports all my life. It's about getting the, Ted, you can probably relate, but you learn that it's about getting the girls. And here my son is, 10 years old, in our home, talking about getting the girls. And so like, this is normalized. It's everywhere. It's on all the social media apps. Even if the kids aren't on it, they're hearing about it from their older siblings. This is what we're confronted with. And so it's like, how can you address that root cause of the problem? Because at a very early age, they're being conditioned. They're being indoctrinated to believe these things. And that equals happiness. So that's the point I was going to make.
Thank you for that. So we're going to continue on with the video. So the first two questions that we asked them was, have they ever heard of light districts in Amsterdam in general, and why did they think that people chose to pay for sex in general? So now we wanted to get a little bit more specific in our street interview process. So we'll play the next clip.
Would I ever? I suppose.
Nah, I wouldn't.
Me personally, nah. It's kind of weird to me. Me personally, it's kind of weird.
I don't think so. I don't think most people would admit to it, to be honest.
That's
with you.
true.
But I hopefully don't know anybody that would.
No, I have. I mean, I don't want to sound like people who do that are bad people. I think the action in itself is wrong.
Yeah.
But people is people that have maybe some problems. I mean, the people is not bad, but these actions are bad.
Yeah.
I wouldn't personally. I mean, I wouldn't say I support it, but I mean, some people do it for their reasons. So, I mean.
I'm not sure, but I mean, why not?
Me, no. I do have a couple friends that probably would.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go to buy sex, but it's interesting to just see it.
No, because I never felt that I have a need for that, to be honest.
Sex work? Yes. Okay.
Interesting, right? Okay, so you can imagine how much longer these clips were. We had to cut a lot down, right? But you get the gist. So I'm curious to know, right? When we did these street interviews, when we put our team together, this was a team of all women, going back to what I was saying about how hard it is to engage men in the conversation. This was all women that were asking these questions on the street. And I'm curious, do you guys think that the answers would have been any different if it were men asking the questions?
Bro.
You know.
It'll be different.
Yeah, bro.
It'll be different because they're talking.
I do. Yeah.
They're talking to their bros, you know. They have to be, act, and say.
And Katrina was part of this interview team, so she saw some of this firsthand.
it would be different.
It was actually interesting. It was interesting to see how people were kind of trying. It looked like they were trying to find the right thing to say. Like they didn't want to scare us off. Meanwhile, we were trying to like appeal to them and get them to answer truthfully. But sometimes just the appearance of a woman can change how you speak. Ted, what's interesting? You talked earlier a little bit about the man box, and of course I Googled you. So what I found in my Googles was an interview you did about the man box, to which you said that in order to prove your manliness, which I think you actually just mentioned just now, that you had to objectify women or sexualize them as a form of male bonding, right? So some of the responses that we received when we focused on like the red light district and like why people go was that this was a form of male bonding. Do you think that this was like an extension of the man box?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because in the man box, we're taught to objectify women and girls. Think about a 17-year-old kid in your community, good kid, boy, goes out, his name's Jamal, just asks Kathy to go out to see a movie or something, right? He lets a couple of his buddies know, they're on a group text saying he and Kathy are going to the movie. He's not calling it a date, he's just saying we're going to hang out. They go to the movie, Jamal takes her home, gets back on the group text, says, hey guys, I'm back. Is the first thing those boys say or ask him is, how was the movie? Well, what did they ask him? Right, so where'd they get that from? They didn't learn this on their own. Again, that's the socialization. So now if Jamal says, I didn't try to get anything, I wanted to be a friend just like you, my friend, then they're gonna say some things like what? I'm gonna ask the men in the audience. What are they gonna say, guys?
Look, they're not.
Right? I'm gonna let you off the hook, Seth. They're gonna say things like, what's wrong with you? You don't like girls? Yeah, all of those kinds of things. So that's the man box. So yes, so it's all woven. It's in the fabric of any male-dominated society. Wherever I go around the world, it's the same thing. Where there's patriarchy, this is the way it gets played out. So yes, can I just share one more thing, especially around our youth? So we have a curriculum called Live Respect, which I shared with you a little bit earlier. And one of the things we asked youth, male identified youth, when we wrote the curriculum with Scholastic was, as we were creating the lesson plans, we asked them about consent. Can you define consent, right? Only 19% of boys in your community, my community, and your community, across the country, 19% of boys could define consent. So 8 out of 10 could not, which explains a lot. It explains sexual assault in the military, it explains sexual assault on college campuses, it explains why girls and women between 16 and 24 are at the highest risk for being sexually assaulted. Our boys think no means try harder or get her drunk because they're not getting any other message. So they're getting the message that, yeah, you want to go purchase a body? Listen, right now today, if there's a kid turning 18, his well-meaning uncle will go up to him and say, hey, you get any yet? And if he has the courage to say no, because you're always supposed to say yes to that, if he has the courage to say no, the uncle's going to say, we're going to take care of that right now. And thinking that he's doing the great uncle thing, he's not caring or worrying about
Katrina.
Yeah, he's not worrying about the girl or woman or queer person that he's engaging with. He's not worried about that. Yeah. So yes.
So I want to actually point out, because like I said, we had to cut this down a lot, right? So there's a lot of clips that weren't shown. Ben, one of the clips that was not shown in this clip was this other guy, and I quote, that prostitution was okay in places like the Netherlands or in Amsterdam, where they hire these sex nurses, if you will, for disabled men, right? So when we talk about the different reasons that people buy, what the mindset is, et cetera, you were talking a little bit about the different reasons that, the underlying reasons that they're trying to address. And we know that legally we have human rights, right? All of us have human rights, but having sex is not a human right. So I wanted to ask you, how can a human right to sex coexist alongside the human right not to be exploited?
Well,
slip that in there real quick.
I think this could be like a philosophical question, but let me nerd out with the legal part of it, legal and policy stuff. And short answer is I don't think it can, but let me explain how to get there. when we have rights, there is a corresponding duty. Think about that for a second. Like if you have the right to free speech, government has a duty to not interfere with your speech. You have the right to privacy. Government and your neighbor, by statute and by the Constitution, don't have the right to, they have the duty to stay out of your house, right? Duties can also be had if there's like entitlement. Government has to provide free education. Government has to provide an attorney if you've been charged with a crime. So with a duty, there comes something that government has to do. So if you think about the right to have sex, think about those two duties and like unpack that for a second. Can the government provide someone to have sex with you? What would that mean? That would mean the government was forcing people to have sex, right? That would violate your autonomy. It would be discriminatory. The government couldn't say, these people over here don't have to provide sex, but you all do. That'd be discriminatory, right? And be all women, probably. So that would violate equal protection. If the government said, okay, we're just not going to interfere, right? You have the right to have sex, we're not going to interfere. Is that an absolute duty the government would have to follow? Think about that for a sec. Does everybody have the right to seek sex? Or do we have conditions? We have conditions, right? You cannot force yourself to have sex with somebody. That's what we call rape. You cannot have sex with a child rape. You, as a teacher, you can't have sex with one of your students, even if that student's the age of consent because of the power imbalance. If you're a prison guard, you cannot have sex with a detainee because of the power imbalance, right? So the government is putting restrictions. Why? Because of the harm that unfettered access to sex would have, okay? Talk about consent. All of that boils down to consent, right? You need to have, in our society, two people consensual. Child cannot consent. A student cannot consent with the teacher. You need consent, right? I think the question then is, can you consent as two adults to a commercial sex transaction, right? And if we look at the harm, and that the next analysis does that create harm or exploitation in your words? And this is where the rubber hits the road. Because people who enter the sex trade do so because of poverty, they're being discriminated against, or because of trauma. No other choice. They're being coerced, mental health issues, substance abuse disorders. And guess what? Majority of it's women. And it's majority women of color. Okay? It's not men. It's certainly not men that look like me. You would never say to me, hey, just make ends meet, go out and sell your body. I would never be, prostitution never be a safety social net for me, right? But for some reason it is for women. That's highly discriminatory. So at the end of the day, you're faced with a system that does not really effectuate true consent because of that economic and social oppression. You know what I mean? It's not true consent, right? And so I think, folks who don't agree with me will say this is pearl clutching, this is morality. No, it's not. It's literally economic and social oppression based on gender inequality, race inequality. And if there was a sex trade out there that was like equal parts men and women buying and selling, a proportionate amount of all color of skin, if people had options to get in and out at their leisure, maybe we'd be having a different discussion. But that is not the reality of the sex trade. And that's why even if you try to help people, quote unquote, sex work, if you try to help it, right? You legalize it, you do some kind of deal where you're regulating it, right? Guess what? They've tried that and they're still trafficking. They're still trafficking. You go to Germany, trafficking, Amsterdam, trafficking. You try it in microcosms in the United States, in Nevada, still trafficking. So point being, I don't think you can do that without eradicating gender inequality, income inequality, and race inequality. Good luck. Hopefully we can do that.
I just want to say that there it goes. Okay, I just want to say that I love when a white man talks about race and equality for me. It's so great. It does my job, you know. Moving right along, Katrina. So going back to other clips that were cut out of this video, right? There was another one where this guy talks about, when we asked them, why do you think people buy sex in general? His answer was, we're talking about like people don't know about the suffering of the people. And he wasn't talking about us, he was talking about the buyers. So I want to know from your perspective, why do you think that society tends to sympathize and empathize with sex buyers more than us as the survivors, or just more than the person on the other side of the transaction? Why do you think the buyers are always getting the sympathy from our culture?
I think it goes back to the societal norms, and as you mentioned as well, there's the power imbalance. And this power imbalance has existed beyond decades, centuries even. And there's been a continuous push to, hey, I'm here and we're equal, treat me as such. And we need more men like this on the front. We can't do it alone. It's not happening. I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and I know people in this movement who's been, preaching the same sermon for even longer than I've been a part of the movement. And, it is exhausting for us. It's exhausting to be a woman for so many reasons. But when was the last time a man had to walk out to his car at 1 a.m. and be concerned about his safety?
Put his keys between his fingers.
Yes, when that's something that we have to process every single day. Some of us are gonna have to think about it going home tonight, especially if you go hang out after this event and now you're getting home. Am I getting an Uber? Am I getting a train? Why do you even have to consider that? Our safety's always in question. And it all boils down to the power imbalance. It all boils down to not enough of you guys on the front line. I love when I hear the quote, or when I hear people say, like, silence is violence. All too often, again, majority of men aren't buying sex, but majority of them are saying nothing. They're saying absolutely nothing.
We've been talking a little bit about the power imbalance and like what we don't want to see. I want to actually turn to our last clip, because the last question that we asked everybody was, would you support or would you want to see a red light district here in New York City? And I think, let's watch the answers first, but I think it makes me think about this idea of, we in New York here, we across America and across the globe, quite frankly, have been normalizing that this treating women as garbage and violence against women and all of the inequities and inequalities that Ben had mentioned, that this is okay, right? Our society has been saying that this is okay, but then we asked this question, and these were the answers that we got.
It's probably the people who work in that industry, because it goes on, as we know, probably need to come together with government and have a discussion about whether it's good for them, and if it's not, then don't do it. But if it is and it helps safety and things like that, then that's great.
There's already there's already plenty of red light districts in New York.
I don't think you really need that. I mean, I think it's here basically.
We both work at law enforcement.
It'll always be in New York because people will always be wanting to buy sex.
There's already is like kind of underground, so like you could say like double advocate, like you could legalize it, make it regulated. Or you say people might take advantage, so it's hard to say like what actually will happen until it actually happens.
I just feel that it will just provide like a safer place for it to happen. Nevada, where they have like that one location just because like where the land was, right? So it could be something like that, just so that the sex workers feel love are protected and just can have like any medical needs that they need.
I think the sex workers should be able to have a wage and to have a legal framework that allows them to work the job they want to perform. In France, even though prostitution is not unlawful, for the sex workers to ask for people in the streets is illegal, and I think they do create ways for people to not be able to buy sex from sex workers and from sex workers to be able to live comfortably with their job, and I think it creates sort of situations where they end up in uncomfortable and dangerous situations.
We have it. We don't have. It's not coming. It's here.
No, not at all. I mean, I cannot support that.
Yeah.
No.
I'm not too sure, really.
Yeah, probably not. I don't think it's great for women, and I don't think it would promote a healthy, safe environment in New York City.
Look, I got 2 daughters, so you know what I'm saying. I think about females myself. I'm like, females got to be respected, and to have prostitutes and red light district it's not where it's at. Maybe somewhere around over there.
If they did it safely and like legally and protected the women who were there or the men, I think that'd be, I don't know, new opportunities.
Some people, they enjoy offering those services and they know that there's a market for it. So, but I think that's the biggest thing, is just making sure that everybody's kept safe if they were to do something like that.
I mean, the prostitution is everywhere, right? The question is about how it's possible to there are rules, so make it safe. Make it safer.
Yeah, I think the red light district is something that grew over time. I'm also not sure if it's the best thing to concentrate something like this in one place.
Well, if it means regulation and safety for the workers, I'd support that, sure.
Same for you?
Pretty much.
Well, that concludes our interview section. So I want to, I know we're short on time, so I'm going to speed through this, but I do want to ask, right, when we think, it's interesting to hear that in the beginning, when we started the interviews, right, everybody's like, yeah, I've been to Amsterdam, yeah, I've heard of the red light district, yeah, it's fascinating. Even the girl said it's fascinating. I wouldn't buy sex, but it's fascinating, right? And it's interesting because when we asked them, well, would you want it here? You saw a lot of nah, no. But specifically, the guy that I found hilarious was maybe over there, you know, right? That's what he said. So I want to talk about this, right? Because sometimes I think as Americans and as people who live in this country, we have this ideology that if something is out of sight, it's out of mind, right? So and I think as survivors, I mean, I can speak for myself and the survivors that I've worked with. I know that oftentimes we are overlooked, even when we're in the life, right? We're walked past every day. People don't, reach out to us and ask us if we need help. They don't really care about what we're going through because it's not their issue, right? Like you were saying with if a man is beating his girl and they walk past, mind your business, right? We have that culture here. But it's interesting to hear that some of these answers were, no red light district here, but over there it's okay. So what does this say about our culture? Is this a culture of othering? Is there a reason that New York City women shouldn't be in a red light district, but women across the pond or across the bridge should be in prostitution? What do you think that these answers in this clip were saying about our culture in general?
There's a complete disconnect. I think that no matter how many speaking engagements I do, I always have people that say, oh, I didn't know that was happening here. Oh, I thought that was in a third world country. Oh, this is real? This exists here? And there's just this automatic disconnect, and it's right here. And I always try to make connections to, again, the parents in the room. Everyone, daughter, sister, mother, what does that look like and feel like for you? And the immediate response is always, oh, that wouldn't be me. Mm-hmm. That wouldn't be me. And I've seen all different shades. I've seen different classes. Everyone's vulnerable. But the reality is that us brown and black girls are more vulnerable. which goes back to what you were speaking of in regards to the oppression that still exists in this country. And what I also find interesting about Amsterdam, how many natives are in those windows? Exactly. So even from that perspective, you know, it's the othering of the othering. Like, it's, you know, we're not taking accountability.
Of course not. And I mean, you know, so we are short on time, so I'm gonna end on a question, one for you two fellas and one for you, Katrina. Fellas, I know we were talking a lot, because we can go on and on about this, and we can continue to talk about this, and if y'all want to keep talking about it, let me know, because we can set this up. But I know this whole conversation was brought just to talk about the demand, because most of the time when we talk about prostitution, we're focusing on me, we're focusing on Katrina, we're focusing on all the other survivors in this room that are female, and it's always the blame, the cultural shift, narrative, the thoughts around prostitution always focus on the woman. And we're never talking about the men. We're never talking about the men that are doing the harm, but we're also never talking about the men that are doing the work, right? Or that could be contributing to the work. And I wanted to focus this conversation more on the culture rather than just legislation, just policy, because policy is important, CSW is important, right? All of these panels that many of us have participated in or attended in this very week is super important. But it starts in this room. It starts with a conversation about culture. And it starts with working with young boys. It starts with educating our young girls. And if we're not doing that, then legislation will continue to be lost and we'll stay in this cycle of fighting for the rest of our lives. So I wanted to ask both of you fellas, Ben and Ted, what do you think is missing? How do you think that we can continue to engage more men in this conversation? We already know the reasons why they're not. I don't think I need to ask y'all, why aren't men in the conversation? We know the reasons, right? They're either on one or two sides of the coin. But it's interesting because a couple months ago, this is something that I love to do. I love to bring survivors together. I love to have roundtables. And we had a roundtable recently where it was all women survivors. And I asked them, why do you think that men are not part of the conversation? And the answers we got, well, this is a woman's issue and blah, 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 right? But interestingly enough, when I asked them, what's stopping us from bringing the men into the conversations, or what are some of the external blockages that are bringing men into the conversation, the room was silent. None of us, including myself, could figure it out. So I wanted to ask both of you, how do we bring more young men and boys into this conversation, to the conversation about violence against women, the conversation about sex trafficking, prostitution? How can we bring them in? Do you have any advice for any of us in the room? One thing that we can take away to start engaging more young men and boys into this conversation?
I'll jump in there, Ben. I'll start us off. So the issue is demand. That's the issue, right? If there's not someone to purchase any product, the products go away. You stop producing the product, or you stop trafficking women and girls, and therefore, trafficking decreases and hopefully ends. So it's really about demand. So it's really about connecting the dots for men, about demand, and that about the commercial sexual exploitation, the entire industry. So whether it's pornography, whether it's the club, the strip club, whether it's purchasing bodies on the street, online, that is all the same. It feeds the industry. And so I think that educating from that perspective, also not blaming the victims is really important, because part of our socialization, again, is that, and we leaned into it a little bit before, that as a society, in any male-dominated sexist society, men are given the benefit of the doubt, right? And when violence occurs against women, we often are critical of the woman who's being victimized or who's being abused. So it might be for someone who's being trafficked or who's being prostituted, we'll blame her for the choices that she's making, and not those who are, when we follow the money, those who are benefiting from it, right? Or who have created that vulnerability, in many cases have been men as well. Whether it's a woman who's sexually assaulted at a party, and we'll say, well, why was she there that late? Or why did she wear that? Or why did she have so much to drink? Or, as I said yesterday in the other panel, if a woman's in a domestic violence a victim of domestic violence, you know, it's not unusual to say, well, what did she say that pissed him off so much? Like, to always look at blaming women for the violence that men perpetrate, finding ways to do that. And that's our default setting in any male-dominated society. We give men the benefit of the doubt in the same way that we in any race-dominant or white supremacist society, we give white folks the benefit of the doubt. They just get it, right? So that's the way it operates. So it's really educating men and boys, and to educate men that, no, this is about all of us, right? It's not just about, it's not your daughter, right? It's somebody's daughter, and that we all have to have some sort of accountability for that, and that it's men that are doing it. So we have to have the conversation, men that are, again, fueling the engine that keeps this thing going. So that's really what we need to do, is start having that conversation, but it means addressing the issue of having value and respect for women and girls. It has to start there. If we don't have that, then nothing's going to change.
Thank you.
I want to acknowledge the tension of us creating this problem as men, right? And then you having to ask, how do we end this? That's bullshit. So I just want to acknowledge that. I think, prevention starting with boys, right? Early on. And then I think having a credible messenger. And I think there's a few ways to do that, and we've seen it with some success in Seattle. Inviting folks who are not necessarily in the room into these spaces. All of us listen to our employers, right? We listen to our doctors, a lot of us do. And we listen to people who we can relate to. So inviting an employer to have a space like this where guys show up, especially at a big tech company where a lot of the buyers are coming from in Seattle, right? That is amazing. Having policies in place, recognizing the harm of sex buying is amazing. A doctor being like, hey, you know, you're 50 years old, you are in the demographic of buying, you say you're lonely. We know loneliness causes depression and dementia. There's a health thing there. What are you doing to address this in a healthy way? Maybe that fires a neuron off that sex buying, or maybe the doctor says, hey, this is out there. I'm going to tell you it's not healthy. Not because of who the women are, because you are not going to have your need fulfilled, right? Why aren't we doing that? I love having these conversations, big and small, and you know, I've had them in the dugout with my old man softball team. I've had them with fathers of my kids, and they ask, you know, what do you do? And it's like, you know, I lead anti-trafficking anti-trafficking work, and sometimes it's a total buzzkill, and people are like, you know, like piecing out on me. But you'd be surprised, like people can be engaged about this. They are really curious, and I think the reason is, especially with like other dudes, is because you are in a space to allow vulnerability. You're talking about something serious. They're not going to get judged, right? It's for some reason it's safer that way. They're not going to get judged. They're not going to be worried about being called a name, right? Their manhood being questioned, and they can actually learn something and be vulnerable. And it's kind of somatic responses you have in that type of environment are really powerful. So I know it's the butterfly effect is cheesy and corny, but I fundamentally believe in it. And then I just think we need to have the guys that are here. Thank you for being here, by the way. I love that term. I'm going to steal that. Don't feel indicted. Feel invited. Like the next time your buddy or your colleague is being a jerk about this kind of stuff, speak up. Let's get to a point where gender equality is super masculine, super cool. And I think most guys want to lean into that. They're just scared to. So.
And Katrina, since you are the woman on this panel with me and my fellow survivor, you have to have the last word, obviously. So I do want to highlight, right? Yes, this was a conversation that was, you know, male-focused, demand-focused. But we already know that NIFEM, all of the organizations in the room that work alongside each other, we know that the most important thing, at least to me, is always having survivors at the helm and survivor leadership. I want to ask you, Katrina, in your opinion, why is it super important that survivors are included in in-demand work? Why not just have a bunch of guys do the work for us? Why is it important that we're there in part of trying to end the demand?
Because we were there. And we have critical insights that no secondary education, no number of studies, degrees could ever reveal. And that's the key to it. That's the gem of it. And, you know, for the organizations in the room, you know, survivors aren't here just to tell their stories. We have so many levels of skills that go beyond a fraction of our life. And did that just cut off? No, it's good. I don't know what it's doing. Hello? Okay, thank you. But we provide that critical insight. We know what it looks like from the beginning to the middle to the end. And you know, it's basic economics. It's no demand, no supply. It doesn't exist. And it cannot happen without us. We need the men on the front line, but we need to stand right there with them because that goes back to the equality. You know, we can talk about it, but we have to talk the, what is it? Talk the talk, walk the walk. Yes. And that's why it's so important. We have that key that, you know, I used to tell the young women that I work with is that, and I work with some really young girls, and you know, they would sometimes get stuck in a space where they can't get past the trauma. And I tell them, you got to find the gems. You got to find the gems in the darkness because it's not always all bad. You know, I learned not only how to protect myself to the best of my ability, but I'm a New York City real estate agent, and the things that I learned out there is what makes me a badass now.
Come on.
And my leadership ability, even before real estate, I was a general manager of restaurants for 15 years. I learned that there. Formal education didn't give me that. And I also had to learn to deal with different type of people and different classes of people and different ethnicities, and that gave me that. And I had to find those gems in the darkness, and we all have them. I mean, everybody in this room has a story. Everyone in this room has a story. And oftentimes we can get stuck at that trauma, and we can't get past that trauma. And we have to find those gems in the darkness, and that's what make what we do so special. Because it was easy for me to carry on with my life and never have a conversation about what I experienced. I could have carried on, have my family, build my career. I know a federal judge right now who's a survivor, and she will never say it. And some of us are called to do this work. So, you know, again, finding those gems. And this is where she found her gem, you know. But no one knows that she's a survivor, and I think her work would be so much more impactful if she would talk about it. But, you know, everyone has their calling and a specific path that none of us can direct. So for organizations in the room, please don't direct the paths of survivors and tell them what they should be doing, should not be doing, who they should be talking to, who they should not talk to. Their stories are not yours. And we're needed. We are needed alongside men like you to address that.
Well, I think, wasn't it the right choice to have Katrina end on the last word? It was, right? Well, actually, no, I'm going to have the last word.
Yes.
But
yes.
women after women, okay? That's the most important. So, you know, we're at that time. I know we're a little bit over. We do have time for 1 or 2 questions. But before I get to those, I want to be a little bit vulnerable with y'all. Is that okay? Yeah? Okay, so I have been a part of this coalition, the New Yorkers for the Equality Model, since it began back in 2019. And I've been in the movement, right, even longer than that. And the one thing that remains constant for me that I've seen is that it's really hard to get people to care about those of us in prostitution. And people think, well, oh, it's her choice or they chose to be there, but why were we there, right? That's the question we need to be asking. But the answer is that we end up there because the system targets us, Black and brown individuals, women and girls, immigrants, LGBTQ plus individuals, anyone living along the margins, right? And for many of us survivors, that's a painful thing to think about every single freaking day, especially when you're in this work. And that's why I started the podcast, Exit Wound, and that's why I'm constantly trying to bring survivors, more survivors, right, into the conversation to amplify and center and prioritize, right, survivor voices and our thoughts around reshaping the culture, not just the thoughts of other people that tell us how the culture should be. We're the ones, like Katrina was saying, we're the ones that know that prostitution cannot be made safer and that it's not empowering, right? I can't even do my quotes properly. It's not empowering, right? And we know that changing the public's perception around this issue is going to take work and it is not going to be easy. But we also know that that work can be done effectively if survivors are at the helm and at the head of the table. We are the true experts in this field, and I'm not just talking about the fact that we know what actually goes on in the life or that we know what sex buyers are actually thinking, even though we do, but I'm also talking about the fact that we know the various ways and creative ways to engage and collaborate with other survivors to create the world that we truly want to see. And it's conversations, shout out to y'all, like the one that we just had here that truly reinvigorate my belief that survivors will not only be supported, but not only be supported with like just empty promises or, oh, I support survivors, yay, right? None of that. But my belief that we need to truly support survivors, not just in theory, but with real, tangible dollars. Because the truth is that this work that we're doing, this survivor-led training, fellowships, grassroots activism, it takes money. That's the truth. So this brings me to this part of the night, right? If you were so moved by said conversation here and want to support survivors like myself, like Katrina, like other survivors that are a part of NIFEM, or the ones that we haven't even reached yet, I want you to look at the postcard that's on your seat. The one that got the people, the pictures, like with me, yeah, that one, And on the back of it, there is a QR code. And I want you, if you want to consider supporting the expansion of New York City, New York State, across the country, if you want to see more conversations like this, if there are survivors like the judge or like others that you may not even know are sitting right beside you and you want to do something about that, if you can, please consider supporting us with real, tangible dollars, like I said. And who knows, whatever you give might even go to a second season of Exit Wound, right? And if you put your name, maybe I'll invite you if you give more than $20. But it's super important, right? Because the truth is, these conversations, we're not paid to be here, right? We're having these conversations because we want to, A, because it's me, A, and also because it's important, right? And like I said, we focus a lot on legislation, we focus a lot on policy, but we're not talking enough about culture. And we are in one of the most progressive states in the country, and we're not talking enough about the issue, right? We need to be, I would like New York City to be the leader in this. Unfortunately, we're behind another state right now, but I won't cry about it. But we want New York to be having more conversations about our culture and changing that. And I hope that whatever you can give, either $1 or $1 million if you got it, right? Help us get there and help us support more survivors. And on that note, I want to say thank you to Ted, Katrina, and Ben for joining me in this conversation this evening. So with that, does anybody have that one question? If you're burning, I saw a hand. Okay, I see two questions. I feel bad.
One really good question.
She can pick. I won't be the one to make it.
Okay. I had a question that is very time sensitive just because of the Oscar-winning buzz of Nora. So I wanted to ask a question regarding that, how you received it as survivors and you as activists received the film.
It's so funny because we knew this was going to come up and we were trying to avoid it. And I'm like, it's going to come up in conversation. We knew it. The one question, we were like, don't say it the whole time and see what happens. And it did. So thank you for your question. I can start and then pass it. You didn't see Honora. Did you see Honora?
I have not seen it.
Did you see Honora?
I've seen clips.
You've seen clips. I've seen the whole thing. So here's the thing with Honora. Compared to other movies about prostitution, right? We have Hustlers, we have Pretty Woman, we can go as far back as way before my time. It's not the worst film. The issue that I have with Honora is that it inaccurately portrays what being in prostitution actually looks like. Now, the director of Honora is a complete other panel in and of itself. He has his own agenda for trying to decriminalize the sex trade, which is what I do not support. But just Honora itself, her, Mikey Madison, right? This movie portrayed this false autonomy in a strip club, right? This idea that you can talk back to your boss, that you can walk out during your shift, this unrealistic depiction of a rich Russian oligarch that's gonna come and pay you for a week's stay and then marry you and then whatever else happens after that. It's all sensationalized, to say the very least. And I think what was more daunting about this film, it was the reaction that I saw from my neighbors in this community after leaving the movie theater. This movie made people, especially younger girls, have this idea that you can be a boss babe working in the strip club. And there was a lot of people after that said, you know what, well, why not? It puts this narrative out there that, well, I can go and join a strip club and I can be fine. No one's gonna hurt me. I can get a lot of dollars very quickly for doing little to nothing, right? I can talk back to my boss, I can set my own hours. It's all falsified. But for those of us in the room and on this panel who have been in strip clubs, we know that's not the case. Can I call you out?
I'm from Atlanta.
Okay, strip club capital of the city.
And we could spend a whole hour on strip clubs.
Right.
And I've been in them. And I still know people in that.
Could you ever talk to back to your boss like that?
Man, please. No.
Okay.
No.
You could never.
You're not going to try it. What?
Especially walking out during your shift and you think that you're not going to get hurt, beaten, hit by the security guard,
it's not one person that's controlling that.
You know what I'm saying?
Even the bodyguard. Like, everyone knows what the assignment is. And everyone falls in line. So no.
And strip clubs are interesting because it's multifaceted, multi-layered, and has so many different forms of exploitation and violence within the club itself. This is not even talking about how it affects culture, but just everything from the security guard at the door, to the bartenders behind the bar, to the VIP rooms, to the people that come in, to the subscriptions or the memberships for the, the special buyers and whatnot, right? So,
and hold up.
Honora is
even how they have to split their money.
Come on.
When you start looking at the breakdown, and all the people who have to get their cut.
We're not gonna get started on strip clubs because we're gonna be here another hour. But quite frankly, for me, when I and I did not want to watch Honora, I watched it so I could be able to sit on a panel and talk about it like this, right? But Honora puts out this false identity that there's this empowerment. And of course, it's represented by a white actress, which we know the majority of people in the sex trade are people of color, particularly and especially Black and brown women and girls, undocumented individuals, Native American girls, and people on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, right? So to show, it again continues to perpetuate the narrative that we already have in society, that you can be white in the strip club and be okay. But does it show anything that happened to us? Did it show Atlanta? Did it show me in New York? Did it show underage girls? Did it show backdoor strip clubs, illegal, right? So we could go on and on, but Honora was just yet again added to the list of movies that falsely portray the sex trade. And with that, y'all can ask us more questions after. I'm gonna invite y'all to spend the last 15 minutes downstairs, have some wine, get our cards. Thank you all for being here.